Hello, and thank you for joining me. This is what I've been thinking with Marcus Cage. I am Marcus Cage, of course, and in this little video, I want to talk about some of the fallout from what some are calling Mini Super Tuesday. There's a lot of interesting things which I've noticed. Some of it may not make a big difference overall, but I feel it's things that we should talk about. So we'll get into it and we'll discuss it. And hope you enjoy. Thank you. Hello, and thank you for joining me. On this video, we're going to talk about my reaction to the Mini Super Tuesday. Mini Super Tuesday, the states which were involved were Washington, Michigan, Missouri, North Dakota, Mississippi, and Idaho. The polls before the primaries and caucuses showed a very, very large lead for the Vice President Joe Biden. Majority of the polls which I was seeing showed that Biden would win all six. I was fingers crossed, best case scenario, hoping for three. I was leaning towards Bernie picking up Washington State, which he did closely, but there's a little bit of, craziness that surrounds that because there are votes missing. They declared him the winner and then they went back on and said he's not the winner. So I'm pretty sure. Well, I'm not going to say pretty sure because I don't know exactly what the campaign's doing and how far or how hard they're willing to push back against the things which are going on, which seem a little odd. Myself personally, I would be spending my campaign money on lawyers to address some of these things like that. Now, Washington State, I haven't heard a whole lot about what's been going on there, but there's things that need to be looked into. Now, other states I've heard a lot more about that's concerned me a little bit more. For instance, we'll go on to the next state, Michigan, where it was predicted in 2016 that Hillary Clinton would beat Bernie Sanders by something like 20 to 25%. Bernie actually squeaked out a narrow victory at roughly about 2%. And the polls this time around had Joe Biden with a larger lead, roughly about a 30% margin. Bernie Sanders actually did a little bit better than that, though he still lost. Joe Biden picked it up roughly around, just over a double-digit margin. So I think it was around 12 points or 15 points. So it wasn't quite the huge prediction that they were picking, but it still was honestly a strong victory for Joe Biden. And if you're following politics in any kind of way, even as a Bernie supporter, if you're objective and honest, you have to admit that it was a pretty hard blow that he took there. Then Missouri, I was not very optimistic about Missouri, even though I know that in areas of say Kansas City, St. Louis, Columbia, where Missouri plays. I figured that would be an area where Bernie had opportunity. But, there was the momentum that came out of South Carolina and came out of Super Tuesday. And a lot of that momentum and positive press, I felt really, really, really helped Joe Biden in Missouri. And I know with the state leaning more to the right, with each cycle, it's lean more where if a Democrat is going to win, it's going to be a Democrat that's going to be more moderate or more conservative, what it's showing. I don't believe that it has to be that way. I just believe that maybe some of the fight and messaging wasn't cemented enough early enough before the momentum got going, because pretty much just like in every single state, the momentum and the day of vote was extremely strong for Joe Biden, and I believe that the momentum was the main reason for it. I don't believe that a lot of people actually took time to decide between the different issues of the two candidates and say, well, this person's better on this or this person's better on that. I honestly believe that it's because of just the overwhelming positive press. I noticed that when Bernie won the first three states, he didn't get the same kind of press. I mean, he didn't even get close to positive press, including when he won in Nevada at the same margins that Joe Biden won South Carolina. Um, so that right there, just the difference in coverage, I feel, is massively effective at swaying the views of voters, especially voters who are not extremely engaged and have a lot more trust and confidence in either that station, that program, or that anchor person, or maybe just the contributor which they brought on to speak about it. Um, North Dakota, it turned out to be a win for Bernie. The fact that North Dakota was a caucus, I believe that would definitely wane towards Bernie. Being that caucuses, you actually have to stand there and show up and do a lot of standing in line, and the fact that a lot of Biden's demographic tends to be older voters, especially that he's doing massively well once you look at 65 and up voters. That's basically what's a lot of Joe Biden's thunder. Um, Mississippi. Mississippi, well, Mississippi didn't honestly surprise me at all. It's just a different mentality that's down there, and I feel there has not been enough outreach, and I'm not trying to fault Bernie Sanders. I'm saying that it's a massive uphill battle because the thinking that you have to break through has been the thinking there for literally decades. And you're not just going to come out a couple of years before campaign and start changing those thoughts and minds, or getting those people who have that like mindset to, automatically just rush out to the polls. Um, Idaho, I felt like because Bernie was doing very strong in the West, that he would have a good chance of picking up Idaho, but it looks like he came up short on that one. Um, again, I feel the media narrative was very, very, very effective. Um, Now that I've spoken basically about each of these different contests, a couple of the things which I wanted to bring up also, which I've been noticing and hearing a lot of disturbing reports. California, the counting in California has been going pretty unusual, and the allocation of delegates, the way they're slowly releasing things, it almost reminds me of how they did Iowa, where I mean, we still don't even know exactly the exact numbers of Iowa. And for me, what I did see, Bernie won the popular vote. So to me, I can't go with any of their other nonsensical numbers that have massive errors all through it, which they literally said, no, we will not change this. This is just how it's going to be. Um, the same thing happened in New Hampshire also. There was a lot of foolery and things that went on that didn't pass the sniff test. I mean, currently right now, we also have down in Texas, in Dallas County, they're asking for recounts because the exit polls are not matching up. I mean, I literally saw a chart where out of the Super Tuesday states, it was something like double digit, like 11.12% difference in exit polls. Now, a couple of points off. That's not a big news flash. That happens occasionally. But when you start to see swings that high, if you're not questioning it, then I just feel that maybe we need to kind of talk a little bit more about how exit polls are and explain some of these things out, because they should never have swings that are that high. And the reason why I feel there are swings that are that high, because they're able to do manipulation with the numbers, and not a lot of people are engaged or aware or understand how these processes are done well enough to see that level of cheating. I mean, you have to be really kind of in the weeds and really following it and know the implications of the different things which they do. I mean, for instance, whenever they shut down polling locations, which they've done in multiple states. And if you notice, well, what I've noticed the trend is, yes, there's been a lot of older voters, but I've noticed also whenever they show these lines, every single time, and if you don't believe me, look up any random one. I don't even have to name one, because it's the same thing. You're going to see it every single time. The people who are standing in that line, those lines that are 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours, 7 hour lines or more, which you see these people standing in, the people who are in these lines, for the most part, are 50 and under. These polling now, it's strange to me that the young vote is supposedly not turning out, but yet they're standing in super long lines. The older vote, which you're not seeing them standing in any lines hardly anywhere, but they're going through and they're voting. Granted, some of that is absentee ballot, some of that is early voting. I get that. But it doesn't make any sense why you're not seeing polling lines with a bunch of older people. Also, every single older person did not early vote. Every single one did not mail it in. So what that's saying is they're obviously micro-targeting certain polling locations to make sure that there's more polling locations in certain places and a little bit less in other places. I saw this firsthand numerous times when I lived in Florida. I also, over the 2018 cycle, I noticed this happening in my home state of Kansas also. There were locations which were predominantly white, very rural, small towns. One of them, Dodge City, which is the famous Western town of Wyatt Earp. That town now is predominantly people of Latin origin, predominantly mostly Mexican or El Salvadorian. Those people, the disenfranchisement which they did in those areas and in the Native American areas in the state of Kansas were disgusting, and it should be embarrassing what they were doing. There were literal emails which people are concerned about the polling locations, and they're laughing and mocking the changes. They put up cones and things like that and construction stuff and saying, well, the building's down, when there was no construction going on. There were plenty of things which they've done. So every time I hear Democrats start screaming about voter suppression, we can't seriously scream about voter suppression until we start dealing with the voter suppression which goes on in our own primaries. Recently, AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, came out and she spoke to that in an interview on Fox News. Well, of course, she backtracked and she took those comments back, and well, it's not quite what I was meaning to say, which it's disappointing that we don't have any elected officials which are willing to speak truth to power and then hold their foot down and stand on it. But, it is what it is. Massachusetts is another state. Massachusetts showed problems with exit poll numbers, and it also showed problems with missing votes. Washington State, same thing. There's issue with missing votes. Michigan also, I just heard about that earlier today. Over 100,000 votes which are missing from Michigan. So it's if Joe Biden capitalized off of South Carolina and all these endorsements and everything, and it was just the TV media that was extra favorable in his way and negative towards Bernie. That's one thing, and I would definitely, of course, still be upset about the favoritism, but I wouldn't look at that as nearly the same as being rigged or cheating if I didn't see these other things happening also. The fact how Tulsi Gabbard is supposed to be on the debate stage because she met the qualifications, and then you have DNC Chair Tom Perez, who comes right around and then flips the rules just again. I mean, he had no problem flipping the rules for Bloomberg to get onto the debate stage twice. And then when those same very rules leave a back door for Tulsi Gabbard to get onto the stage, you take the only female who's left in the race, who's a combat veteran, active duty still, an actual major, an elected official, and you basically treat them like nothing, like they don't deserve respect. Keep in mind, Mr. DNC chair is a representative also. They're both representatives. He basically just has a position. So he's basically saying, well, I have this little position, so I'm going to wield unduly power against one of my peers and colleagues. Just because, well, I'm not going to speculate why he's doing it. I mean, I have plenty of theories, and I'm sure some of you all do also. But, it's just not right. And I feel if we're not pushing back against these things and we're not complaining about these things, whether we support Tulsi Gabbard or not, we're partially at fault for whenever they do this to the other candidates. I mean, I wasn't a Yang supporter, but I like the fact that he was in the early days trying to buck the system. I soon became disillusioned with Andrew Yang as I looked more into it. But I didn't like how the media would constantly omit his name, how they would omit his name off of polls. They did the same thing with Tulsi Gabbard. They left her off of polls. They did the same thing with Mike Gravel. They left him off of polls. They did the same thing with Marianne Williamson. They left her off of polls. They did the same thing with de Blasio. They did the same thing with Julian Castro. They did the same thing. Trying to remember who else they did that. They even did it with Cory Booker. They did that to Cory Booker in one of the polls also. But we're not talking about any of those things, and we're not pushing back on those. And we're spending more time just running with whatever the narrative that's been set up by, legacy cable news. And we need to start pushing back. That is the only way we're going to get them to start, actually covering these things and taking them serious. I take my vote serious, and I'm pretty sure most of you also take your vote serious. And we should be able, in the United States of America, be able to count on our vote being legitimate, that we should be able to count on when we cast that vote is going to go through and it's going to go for the candidate we support. We shouldn't have to worry about the DNC deciding that they're going to do whatever they want in smoke-filled rooms and disregard the will of the people. I watched Joe Biden when he got into one of his testy exchanges. The voter who was questioning him actually said, you're having all this attitude and you're acting like you forget that you work for me. And Joe Biden was about to say, and then he cut himself off. He caught himself because he was about to say, I don't work for you. And that's the problem. As long as we keep propping these people up who feel like they are supposed to be in charge, and they forget that, no, you're actually applying for a job when you're running for president, and the American people are the bosses. We're the interview. And if you don't respect us, you don't respect are issues. Now, I don't even agree with the framing of the guy's question, because what he was asking about gun control. But the constituent should always, always, always be put ahead and should be respected far more than the politician. The politician does not deserve the respect over the constituent. And somewhere along the line, media has began to frame things that way. It's a sad state of affairs, but that's how it is. And the only way we can force the media to do the right thing is, stop listening to them. If you notice they're going to continuously give bad information, you can actually ask others to stop watching. You can start commenting on their pages. You can start writing letters, phone calls, do whatever. But we have to start putting more pressure, even if it's small pressure and you feel like, I don't know how much I'm doing. Every little bit helps as far as pushing them in the positive direction, which they need to be going in. With that said, I guess I'll leave it here. And we got a debate that's coming up tomorrow. Look forward to it. Hopefully this debate can open some eyes for people out there so they can see the real choices that we have and they can make the right choice before it's too late. Thank you. Have a good one.